Hi, Tammy. I just didn't want you to be here and here alone.
Okay. And actually, I don't have any questions. How are you doing this morning? Okay.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm loving looking at all your work again. I can't wait to talk about it. We're waiting. Yep, just a few more minutes to let it work. How are you doing this morning?
Good. I bought a new, not modem, but I guess you call it a modem, right? Yeah, and so I need to install it. And so because my other one has been giving me a little bit of trouble. And then I was like, oh, I should install it yesterday. And I was like, oh, wait, maybe I should not install it right before this. Maybe that's not a good idea. I think I'll wait.
Let's see. I'm now trying to figure out how to. All right, there we go. Yeah, no, I'm hopeless with computers. Shay can walk in and look at it and point at it and it'll start working again. I just destroy, which is why I have to not touch the computer while we interview. But it's so hard for me not to talk while I'm sitting in front of you. You know I have to wait.
I don't think there's any rules. We can talk.
No, you're right. You're right. What did you have for breakfast?
I haven't had breakfast yet. I just had coffee.
Are you not much of a breakfast person?
I'm not. I try to be better at it because I can really let the day get away from me, and then I'll like eat really late at night, which is not great.
Yeah.
But if it is breakfast, it's more like instant oatmeal or like toast or something like that. Yeah, nothing elaborate.
Yep.
Sometimes I'll put turkey bacon in the oven, and I'll feel like a really big accomplishment. Like, wow, wow.
Oh, man, I've been.
That's a lot. It's elaborate.
Yeah, Shay makes beautiful, elaborate breakfast when he has time, and if he doesn't cook for me, it's the same. I just don't eat. And I won't notice until later. I'm like, why am I so cranky? Oh yeah, Shay didn't make me food. Hi.
Hi. I've been waiting to give people a few minutes to join us, but I'm gonna go ahead and do an intro so that y'all can get talking.
Great.
Okay, give me 1 minute. All right. So hi there, everybody. My name is Jordan Gentry Nelson, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Big Medium. And I appreciate all of you being here today. I'd love if we could start by having you all introduce yourselves in the chat, just who you are and what you do. I think that that's a nice way for us to know who's in the room, per se. Also, please feel free to use the chat throughout the workshop to ask questions. We do still want this to be somewhat interactive, so if there's a question relevant to the conversation, you can put it in the chat. But also keep in mind, we will leave time at the end for Q&A, and that'll be a moment where you can actually turn your video on and ask your own questions. So keep that in mind as Jana and Tammy are having a conversation. So welcome to Coffee Chats. This is a program of Creative Standard, which if you're not familiar with, is the professional development wing of Big Medium. And through coffee chats like this, featuring leaders in the creative community, as well as regular workshops, our goal is to fortify and promote the creative, professional, and economic success of local artists. And today we have artists Tammie Rubin and Jana Sweck with us. Jana, in addition to being a co-founder and board member at Big Medium, serves on our Creative Standard Committee. And we are wanting to give all of our committee members the opportunity to do interviews for this program. So expect to see different community members as a part of coffee chats going forward. And Tammie Rubin is our featured guest today. Tammie is a visual artist who transforms familiar objects into mythic sculptures and installations that explore the gaps between ready-made and the handcrafted object. She's also a member of Icosa Collective along with Jana, as well as Black Mountain Project. And I won't say any more and let y'all talk about yourselves. And with that, take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't think I need to talk too much about myself, but Jordan pretty much said it. I am a founding member of Big Medium and an artist in Austin and a Icosa member with Tammie. And it's actually my first interview I've ever done, so I'm excited that Tammie is my first guest. So Tammie, how are you this morning?
I'm good. I feel like that, you know, like every day is different, you know, depending on like what is like scheduled and what's the news. And, you know, I think we have to just try to be more careful with myself about like how much information I inundate myself with, especially early in the morning.
Oh yeah.
So I had to kind of like meter it out a little bit. Like you can't listen to all the news podcasts and NPR and like with the newspaper, you have to, you know, kind of negotiate how much information you take in during the day. So,
oh yes.
Yeah.
Especially,
and I'm like listening to more music too. Like I'll listen to a couple of news podcasts and then I'll like jump on music as I'm like getting ready to just like help alter the mood. So
yeah. Do you jump right into what do your days look like right now? I mean, I know you just finished teaching for the semester. Are you reading a lot, making art? What are you doing in your time when you have
well, right now I think I'm just kind of doing that like a little bit recovery from the end of the semester. So yeah, we just ended last week and there's some kind of loose ends, administrative things that I need to take care of. And I'm also on AIPP, Art in Public Places. So we have a jury call coming up. And so there's some things that I'm doing for that. And yeah, just kind of now planning out what does the rest of the time like look like as far as like making. And even now I'm still thinking about the fall because there's uncertainty about like what teaching looks like in the fall.
Right.
So,
well, especially for you. I mean, how do you even teach sculpture virtually? I mean,
you know, the pivot was interesting. It was, yeah, I mean, I had, you know, we didn't have a lot of time. Most professors didn't have a lot of time to like come up with a kind of a new curriculum, but it was important to me that students still try to be able to make something hands-on. And so I was teaching several clay classes, and then I had junior seniors who were already making independent work, so that was much easier. And so I pivoted from clay to paper. And so we were making casting paper forms, basically.
But doing it virtually? I mean, you would do the class.
We did it virtually. So I was like looking for things that like they didn't have to go to a store. They can use anything at their house. Like what is something that everybody has at their house? And then we were making pigments from things in the kitchen. So dyes like coffee grounds and like turmeric or paprika and kind of spices like that. And so, yeah, so we did the pivot and I think I learned a lot. So they were kind of, unfortunately, had to be my guinea pigs. And there is a way to do it on Zoom. So it was like, yeah. It takes a lot of planning though. And I did figure out like multiple views of things are good. So like with Zoom, you can like, you know, log in from multiple places. So like I would like log in from my phone too, and then that would give us a second view for them to see demos that I was doing.
Oh, that's so great. I'm sure you learned a lot of new things too. I mean, were you already doing dyes with things in your house? I mean, that's incredible. I mean, talk about a way for an artist to sort of expand, you know, ways they do things. That's awesome.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about paper or, you know, paper mache stuff from like camp or anything. So I was like, oh, what are these contemporary artists that are working with paper? And it's like, oh, there's a bunch of people. So yeah, it was good for me. It's always good to like have that challenge of you having to learn something that you didn't know either.
Well, and that's almost, I feel like one of the most important things teachers can teach students is like just experiment and play and you know, come up with ways of making something work.
Yeah, that's definitely. Great. I mean, I think that's what I like about teaching is that, you know, you are saying things like experiment and be open, and it reminds you to make sure that you're experimenting and being open as well. And then yes, if I want to, if I want to embark onto a new like material or technique that I don't know, that I think would be beneficial for me as an artist or even as my students. So sometimes I try to learn something new, not knowing that I'm going to ever use it in my practice, but
right.
For like students. And so, and often finds its way back. It becomes kind of circular. So I really like the kind of the give and the take of that, like the exchange that happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I was mourning not having them in a physical space.
Yeah.
And I think that they were like mourning that as well. It is hard to create that kind of communal energy through a digital format. And, but, like the priorities have to be safety right now, right?
Yeah.
Like that's got to be the priorities. I'd hate to have, anything else happen to students or my colleagues, or for them to take something home to their parents or meet, anything like that.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it makes us have to be more creative and more open in a way that we hope that we always are, but we see that a lot of times we can be quite inflexible in our daily lives. And this has definitely shown us like, where is your flexibility? Like,
right.
Are you able to pivot? Are you able to, how are you able to like manage this new terrain that we all have, right?
Yeah.
And like, what does that look like going forward? So.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask you questions about that later too. Well, let's start with just like a brief background kind of, I mean, we don't have to go in too far but like where you're from and yeah, just kind of how you grew up and how you were first exposed to arts and yeah.
So I grew up in Chicago, South Side, Southwest Side. I have like two brothers, and we're kind of like a big difference in age between us. And I went to kind of a small kind of parochial schools, Lutheran grade school, Lutheran high school, a little bit of Catholic high school. And it was kind of just like, I like loved growing up in Chicago. I loved growing up in the city because I now think back to like all the experiences that I had as like a kid or, as a teenager. And, we were just like, I really just like take advantage of just wandering through like downtown and just like looking at the buildings, going to the Art Institute, going to the museums, going to the park. And so even though I wasn't making a lot of art then, I kind of feel like I was definitely surrounded by visual things all the time, right?
Did you do that alone? Did you wander the cities alone, or did you have family members that really nurtured the arts around you? Or
well, if you're a kid in Chicago and you go to school, like your field trips are going to be the Art Institute, they're going to be the Museum, Science and Industry, it's going to be all those kinds of things. And then I had an aunt who actually kind of recently passed away, but she was a school teacher, and when she would she was very much into like theater. So whenever she would like she would like have these programs where she would take people to theater, and she would take me along with her. My parents were kind of like, it's just interesting now to think about it. Like we went to a lot of theater, a lot of bad theater. There was a particular point in time where I don't remember what it was, but it was like maybe a fundraiser or something like that. We went to like this theater, dinner theater. And I thought it was the best thing ever. And I made my parents take me like 3 more times. And then I was like, oh, that was not good theater, but it doesn't matter, right?
With the food? No, I'm just kidding.
I was like, the food and entertainment together? What? Yeah, so this was before you could go to like order a burger at a movie theater, right? Like, so it's like I thought it was the best thing ever. So it was like field trips, and then when I got older, I would just, when I was able to take public transportation myself or drive, I would kind of just like do that myself. So and with friends.
And friends, yeah.
Yeah, but I read a lot, so I felt like the first time I thought of the possibility of someone having a creative life or being some sort of artist was really through writers, of being able to make the connection like, oh, this writer is like someone who's living right now in New Hampshire. Like that's what they do for their job.
Oh, the art of writing, not writers writing about art, but writers.
Okay. I really do feel like that was the first time I thought like, oh, there's creative people out there, and this is how they live their life. They do this every day. Where I feel like sometimes I think sometimes there was such a disconnect between looking at art in a museum and thinking kind of in your head, even if they weren't, that everybody was dead and inaccessible. So it wasn't like I was going to, like I wasn't in a situation where I was like going to see artists, live artist talks or anything like that. So it felt so distant. But writers started to feel like more like, oh, these are accessible. Like these are people that like you can read on the back of the jacket, like what they do and where they live, and that there's a way to have a creative life. So I think that was kind of like my first.
That makes sense though, that books would be sort of the first exposure to creative people too. I mean, as a child, I remember having a series of books all illustrated by the same artist. And when I found out she lived in Vermont, and was this, 60-year-old illustrator, I started writing her letters going like, I can't believe you exist and I want to be.
Wow.
Anyway, no, just books being that first way of hearing and being exposed to art. Well, awesome. And then I know you going to parochial school and being in church a lot, you started being exposed more to these objects that were so sacred and worshipped. Do you have that you brought into your, could you explain maybe your first few memories of coming across things like that made you, how it influences your art now?
I was raised Lutheran, and we had this. It wasn't like the biggest church, but it was still like a really beautiful kind of small parish church. And so there were lots of like mosaics and like the organ with the kind of oversized pipes and things that you use for like communion. So sometimes you have like the envelope, like they don't do that anymore. But I remember we used to take communion out of a communal cup. Like one cup, which seems crazy now, right? But all the things that those things came in. So like the way that the cup was modeled, or like if there were individual cups, or like the altar, or just like the ornateness of all the things, the carvings for the pews. All of those things became really interesting to me to look at, because I felt like because I went to that school, and then that school was attached to the church. And when you're in parochial school, like you have a chapel. So like on a Wednesday, I kind of already, you're already sitting in church kind of for like a short period of time. And then Sunday, it's the same theme. So it's like, we just heard this on Wednesday. So I think I just became interested in just the looking of things, like the mosaic objects. And like, I would make up all these stories in my head about the chimes and the objects, and like that someone made that, right?
Well, and the ritual, as I imagine too, the way they hand things to each other with things draped over them. I mean, there is this just like preciousness to so many objects in the church.
Oh, definitely. And just like the idea of ritual period is something that's really intriguing to me. Peace be with you, where you are like, shaking the hands of your neighbors or hugging them, and the fact that like you do certain things during certain times of the year. Later on, I became an acolyte, which is basically like I guess in the Catholic Church, they're usually boys, but like lighting up the candles and things like that.
Oh, I remember,
yeah, all those kind of things. So just like this, giving power to the idea of ritual, giving power to the idea of like objects, I think is the first time that like the object became and a thing of importance. But also just thinking about like superstition. So I feel like my mom was kind of a superstitious person, like all these kind of like wives' tales. I remember once she would say like, well, if you're pregnant and you have a craving, don't touch your body, like don't touch your stomach anywhere, because your kid will have like a birthmark. Right? Like, so there's all these also like the things that the stories that I think I was like reading, the stories that I would hear in church, the stories that I would hear from like relatives, like kind of like these superstitious things, and thinking about like how you give inanimate objects like weight in your life, and the rituals that I kind of think I've set up for myself, right? Of like things that seem important, and I think we all have those, whether you use the same kind of cup. You've got like 20 cups, but you only pick up one kind of cup or one kind of pot or plate or like comb or whatever. Like we
You're
create
right.
these rituals for ourselves.
Well, and kids especially like begin with, I mean, they give souls and life to all their toys. And, you know, I mean, they talk to trees, they talk to objects, they can totally put themselves in that mindset of giving, you know, a life to an inanimate object. And it's interesting to think about, like, as I feel like artists do that kind of, maybe not all artists, but like artists tend to make things in a similar way. Like I know I'll make paintings, and as I make them, I like to pretend that this thing really does exist somewhere, and that I'm creating it as, you know, it's coming to life as I make it. And I wonder, it all, like for people who don't have that creative outlet, do you think that, I'm kind of tying this into, you know, you have done a lot of work with consumerism and people just wanting things and more things, and how they're cheaply made. And so I wonder too, like if people that don't have the ability to create, is that where that outlet goes? Do they grow up kind of wanting to buy things that they then cherish, that they then love that much as they, I mean, I don't know that they're related, but I wonder if that's at all part of it. Why do you think we consume the way we do?
I think it's comfort. I mean, I think that there's so many things that we can't control, and it's a way to have a sense of control. I think that the expectation, you know, I feel like I'm, you know, being home is like, it is so tempting to look at things online and want to buy something, right? It makes you feel like you've gone somewhere, you've done something, right? And then the kind of the expectation of what this thing is going to do for you or bring to you, or the just maybe it's even just the experience of us all trying to like recreate opening a present, like, you know, like physically opening a present when you're a kid, right?
Yeah.
So the best part is usually not the thing, it's the expectation of opening the box to get to the thing.
You're right.
So like having these like little experiences, I think, is what maybe what we're craving. And in some people, you know, I think maybe some people like nature is like that for them, like being outdoors can be like that for them. But then, yeah, you know, you do have people who are, you know, collect dolls or rocks or stamps or, you know, books or what have you. This idea of like,
it keeps you company.
Yeah, these keepsakes, or making like these keepsakes. Yeah, I don't know. I have a, I'm not sure what exactly why, but I do think it has to do with this like expectation. And I feel like a lot of times it's just like, it's probably slightly disappointing, right? It can never live up to the looking and the wanting, the getting, right?
Yeah.
Or rarely it can. So.
Well, so tying that also to the work that you make, I know you will make sculptures that really are so meticulously made, with the intention of making the viewer come in real close. I mean, you can't help but want to just get up in there, and you can't help but want to touch it and feel it, and but you're not allowed, you know, you're not supposed to in a gallery setting. And I wondered if, well, one, I wondered if you ever did wish that people could touch your work, because I know as you make it, you're probably experiencing it in such a different way than anyone ever gets to, and a closeness to it. Is there, do you ever wish that the viewer can touch your pieces, or is it very important that they're not allowed to, that they get that kind of dual opposite tension?
Yeah, no, I don't want them touching the work. I think that like that's the part of it. Like I think the earlier work, especially where I was doing a lot of like carving, and I was using like clay and like frosting bags, and with these like food tips, and I was using food molds and things like that, is like that sense of not being able to, like that tension of like wanting to, like one, you know, like you have to get close to see it, looking so textural, you know, it mimicking the things that like food does in a way, like, but not being able to do that, that sense of dissatisfaction is something that I actually want in the work, right? Like it's like there's a barrier there, right? Yeah, so I never, like, no, I don't want people touching the work. I think it's like, there's something about like that, you know, you can't do everything, like, right? Like there are some things that like, this is the way that, this is about seeing. It's not about like the holding or the touching. It's about looking and experiencing through look, and experiencing through like holding time And can you hold their time, right? Because for some people, not very long, and for other people, it's going to be longer.
Yeah,
right?
no, that discomfort.
So, yeah, exactly.
Well, and I wondered too if, I know it would be different for you, but when you make art, do you set up do you set it up to where you have your own levels of discomfort while you make it? Like, do you set up the same kinds of tensions for yourself where you have a vision of what you want and you know it's just going to be amazing and beautiful, you know, or it's supposed to look a certain way, and yet you know if you make it this way it's going to take forever and it's going to be so hard and you're going to have to cheerlead yourself through it? And I mean, do you create those same kinds of tensions?
I do. I mean, I'm also I've worked with like ceramics a lot in my life, and so I'm also like usually working in a way which sometimes it doesn't want to do the thing I want it to do. Mm-hmm. And so there is kind of a humbling of that, of like trying to figure out. So for instance, when I use the ball moss, you know, you can dip clay, you can dip organic object into like a clay slip. It does not love it. It does not want to do that, right? So, you know, you're creating these really thin shells and then you're trying to figure out like, well, how do you make this into work that is not so like, you know, like esoteric and it's like not like just kind of chipping away. So there's like a lab quality to it of the experimentation and like the problem solving and the figuring it out and the failing that is like, is important to my process, right? So sometimes it feels like it's taking, you know, people are like, well, like, how's the work coming for that show? And I'm like, oh, you know, it's coming. And it really is like, it's all this lead up to get to the place where, okay, I know exactly how everything is going to behave, sort of, and I can just like move forward. But before that, there's usually this time of like how to make this work, or like with the Dimension show, I hadn't like welded or anything like that since, I don't know, maybe grad school or something like that. And so I had taken a class at Laguna Gloria with Aaron. And I was like, oh yeah, I gotta like remember not just like welding, but just like what I need to set up a small station to make that happen. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, well then that's what I'm doing for the show. So like I had a grant. So like now like you gotta make it work, right? And then also I started the hanging forms in that show were I2am was not clay, but there was some clay, but it was mostly construction foam. So construction foam that was like carved and then dipped into like colored resin. And so some of the carving I'd done before, but to use it so specifically in a work I hadn't. So all of that was new, of, you know, carving through and how long, and then trying to get the bubbles out of the resin. And like, you know, I think I bought this resin that really set, I think it set in like 10 minutes. Not a great idea. That was too short of a working time. I couldn't get things dipped in time. So, but you know, like that's all part of it for me. Is the process, is that like learning and experimenting and failing, and then like when it works, you're just like very excited. And then when it's up, it's like I'm already thinking about the next thing. Yeah, it's like done. I mean, like, I'm already done with it.
Well, and how much do you? I mean, so you just kind of answered this, but so how much do you plan what something's going to look like, and how? I mean, it sounds like you leave a lot of openness to figuring things out as you go. So I guess what I mean is planning the actual visual ending. Do you not always know how that's going to look in the beginning, and it is kind of meant to be figured out as you go?
I usually start with this, like that, like the seed of it is usually some sort, like I have like an idea, and then I have some things that I want to hit on. And then I also have like, usually there's an object that's interesting, like a very specific object that's interesting to me. And then I have this idea, and like, I kind of trust that because they're surfacing at the same time, that they do have some sort of resonance with each other. Like I'm just kind of like trusting, like, okay, well, if I'm thinking about this particular object and this idea is happening, then they must overlap in some way. And what does that look like visually for that to happen? Yeah. So while I do have like these kind of like, well, I know I want it to be like immersive, or I want it to be modular, you know, like, or like color is going to be important, or I'm going to be like exploring, you know, now the cone form is becoming specifically the Klan's hat, where it was not that before, right? And why is that? Then So I start with those things, but then it very much changes and grows through the process of working. I feel like that's how I think the best is when I'm physically working in the studio. And because there are like these things that we're talking about, like all these tasks that kind of need to happen, or like these things that I need to learn as I'm doing it, I'm always like busy, even if it's not the final work. You know what I mean? Because I have all these steps to get to that final work. And that helps me kind of like figure things out as I'm going, and to kind of like cement the conceptual idea and how to present it in like a visual way that is satisfying. So to me,
Wow. Ah, that's awesome. Well, I wanted to talk too about remind me again when you moved to Austin, when you left Washington.
I moved the fall of 2015.
Okay. So when you moved to Austin, can you tell us a little bit about the sort of the differences that you've seen coming to Austin, how you make your work, the Austin scene itself, from the places you've lived before?
Yeah, so I moved from Chicago to, and actually in undergrad, I was in Champaign, Illinois. And then I moved back to Chicago, and then I lived in Chicago for a while. And then I moved to Seattle to go to grad school, University of Washington. And I lived there for quite a bit. And then I moved back to Champaign, Illinois, but this time for a teaching position.
Oh, well.
And so that is a twin city. It's about 140,000 people. So it's quite intimate and small. And smallest place I've ever lived, and not necessarily a great fit for me. I'm very much a city person.
Was that your first teaching gig too?
That was my first college teaching degree, gig. But I taught at like art centers before, and I was an academic advisor at a college in Seattle after grad school. And so, I think there really wasn't an art. There were artists in Champaign, but there was not necessarily an art scene, because there's one gallery, there's a gallery, cinema gallery, which is great, which is in Urbana, but there's not a bunch of galleries or anything. And it's slightly too far. It's like about 2 hours and 20 minutes from Indianapolis, and then a good 2:30, maybe 2:30 to 2:45 to 3 to get to Chicago. Wow. So it's far enough away where you just can't pop by necessarily.
So how did you make art during that time, or
I made a lot of art. I was really productive because there wasn't art. Like there was nothing else not nothing else to do, but like there was it was limited as far as visual arts. It's a really good place for cultural arts. They've got the Credit Art Museum is an amazing theater performance center, so that's there. But as a visual artist, it really felt kind of isolating.
So how did you deal with showing your art at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, I showed a lot of arts. I was actually really productive. So I had shows all over the country. So I was doing a lot of group shows and individual shows, a lot of university shows. And so there was this time where I was definitely constantly packing work into boxes and shipping or driving work all across the country, and sometimes having these shows in a lot of places that I'd never been before, and sometimes I wasn't going to go anyway, they were group shows. So that was probably the biggest change, is from being from there to here, is that I have not ever been living in a place where I've had so many shows.
Oh, wow.
And been familiar with the spaces ahead of time, and been able to interact with that space multiple times, which I think has definitely changed the practice in a way. It's different when I think that I have to ship sculpture, and I wasn't using art handlers. I would ship FedEx. So it's I have to pack these boxes knowing that they're going to get the crap beat out of them, right? And so that things that don't break, but people can set them up, and so or I've got to be able to fit them into this truck or this car. So it's been really interesting to be able to I'm just going to drive it down the street.
Huge amount of stress off your plate right there.
Time. Oh my God, the time.
Yeah. Well, so do you think that's because Austin has just more art spaces? People are just more, is there just, maybe just a more vibrant art community here than Champaign, or?
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, it's a much bigger place than Champaign. But you know, Seattle too, it reminds me of Seattle in some ways. There is like a very kind of like an intimate, scrappy, do-it-yourself feeling that I think that is here, is that because it isn't, you know, it's not Houston, it's not Dallas, it's not San Antonio. I think that was the biggest interesting thing, because I didn't really know that anything about Texas. Mm-hmm. This was my second time. My second time being here was when I came to interview at St. Edward's. So I didn't really have a sense of what it was. But you know, right away, people tell you how Austin is different from the other cities, and the other cities do that too. They say, "Oh, I'm from Houston, and it's like this," but like Dallas is like this, and like, you know, and I'm just like, "Oh, that's interesting." And like when I, you know, in Chicago, like I never talk about Rockford. Like I don't say like, you know what Rockford is like. We don't, you know, it doesn't happen. But when you have this many big cities in one state, they have their own specific characters. Like it's like very kind of like regional, right? Yeah. And so what I think about Austin is like that it was very like open. People were like, you know, like they were not just open, they were friendly and they were warm. And I would say that I felt like when I lived in Seattle, people are friendly, but they are not necessarily warm. And there's a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I just think that people are very much like, you know, if you think it, you can find someone else to help you do it. And it's got a lot of issues as far as like, you know, like trying to find a place to work, hoping, especially with the, you know, the pandemic, like I hope, you know, art spaces are going to take a hit. I hope it's not going to be a massacre, but it's concerning, and it's always concerning because artists need space. Right. Space costs money, and then there's always this kind of way that artists also have this cachet of like bringing this idea of cool to an area or a place, and then they're quickly like priced out of that same area that they brought this like cultural capital to. Yeah. And so there's always, in, you know, whether it be Chicago or Seattle or here, that wherever it is, if it's a city and it has cultural capital, and it has like artists, that there's always this kind of like, are you going to be able to continue to make work in the place that you live, right? Yeah. And you know, I think that that's going to be a debate that, yeah, we're gonna have some challenging times.
Yeah, I mean, you're so involved in, you know, AIPP and Black Mountain and ICOSA and just these sort of community groups that all need spaces. What do you think about when you think, like, what do you think the future holds, just even in the next 6 months to a year, in terms of how innovative ways artists can show their work if we can't be in closed spaces?
Well, I would say, you know, ICOSA, as you know, is more dependent on a space. Black Mountain Project, while we, you know, have this like 250 square like micro space, kind of like an overgrown hallway, the way that we've done programming there has not been dependent necessarily on space. So what has been really, what I think is that there are times where collaboration between spaces are needed. Mm-hmm. And for us, that's worked out very well. So like we've had a video screening, and we used 105 and Big Medium, and Big Medium was very generous with us. The Museum of Human Achievement, when we had a panel, that's where we had our panel, because we wanted to have a larger group of people. ICOSA and Black Mountain Project did a project together, the Open Read. So I think, you know, what may need to happen, or I don't know, like may mean that everyone doesn't have an individual space, but maybe we have to think of having a more communal space that more people contribute to, mm-hmm. and then think about programming that in a way that works for multiple groups. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there is the digital virtual format is something that we haven't had to think about in a real way. Mm-hmm. And so that we just haven't, right? I mean, I know I haven't, right? And to think about how in some ways it makes the art community not accessible for everyone. Right. And I mean, I already knew that, like that, you know what I mean? But like, what was I doing about it? And so knowing that there are some people that, you know, it's not the pandemic that's like, they already can't get out of their homes easily, right? For mental or health reasons or what have you, like maybe, you know, you don't have childcare, right? And maybe you don't have are not able to like travel to see work in a lot of different places. And so, you know, I think the glass tire the 5-minute tours, which they're going to continue, you know, they're going to continue that programming even when maybe we're able to be back in spaces again, I think makes a lot of sense. And it opens up the conversation to the ways that we may have not been servicing everyone in the best way possible.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
What about your work? Have you had thoughts about, I mean, your work requires people to get up so close to it. Have you had sort of new fantasies about what you could make for your next projects if this lasts much longer?
Well, I'm right now without a studio. So I'm in like a really, I'm in like a strange space right now because I would do all my like kind of like physical work at school. And so school's now closed. Like, so the university's closed. And so, you know, I have to figure out like what my access to like now, like the wood shop and welding and kilns is going to be. I have physical space where I am, but I'm kind of thinking that I just maybe need to like move. So I'm right now trying to figure out like what that looks like. And it, you know, it's like very much a blow with everything for like everybody, of course, is that like during spring break, I was like, okay, now I got to come up with a new curriculum. Oh, also I don't have a studio space right now. And I was, you know, it's like, holy, you know, it's like, oh shit, what am I going to do? And so,
do you feel that? I mean, like, how does that, how are you coping in terms of?
Well, it was very much a moment of like, yeah, just like, oh shit, like just, like there was just like a wave of it, like, oh, okay, so I'm not going to be seeing my students again this semester, like what? And then, and then you're not making work right now, but also, I had this moment where I was like, well, you know what? I don't have to solve all of this right at this moment. And I think I tend to do that. I'm just like, okay, we got to solve it now. I'm like, wait, no. You don't have to solve it right now. You can give yourself some time to think about it, give yourself permission to think about it. And also like, you know, kind of feel this, because my way of thinking is like, it is more like, okay, let's solve this problem, let's move forward, like what can we do? And so giving myself permission to like have a moment to really think about it. And then also I was like finishing a project. This is how ridiculous I am though, because it's only been a month, right? But like I was finishing a project as Austin was shutting down. And so I just finished a big project, but already, like I said, as soon as it's up, my brain is already like, what are we doing with the next thing? You know, like that thing is already, you know, done. That's, you know, it's out of my head in some sense. So
yeah, so that must be really hard. I mean, where you're very used to moving always forward, always in the future. And yeah, taking that step right now. So are you doing, I don't mean, are you making artwork, but are you finding that you're doing things that are new to you to kind of get that same kind of need out? Whether it's like cleaning or over cleaning, I don't know, anything.
Oh, I wish I was over cleaning. That is not quite.
That's what I do.
That's not kicked in yet. I think the first thing was that I wanted to make sure that I was having as much, like I really kind of thrive on dialogue and kind of like experience and community and that kind of thing. And it's like, well, like how does that happen now? You know, how do you have those kind of like, if you can't go look at artwork, like what other ways are you leaving space? Like how do you do that? Like if you can't go into a museum, you can't go into a gallery, you know? And so I've really been impressed. Like I think that the time that some places have put into through their education departments and their social media coordinators, whatever those positions are, have created a lot of content. So there's a lot of digital content out there, which was extremely helpful for me in some of my classes, where I was able to look at an exhibition that LACMA did, Membrace Pottery, and they had consulted archaeologists and sociologists and talk to artists. And then there was this archive of like 20 short videos about this show. And then I saw that the Dallas Art Museum had, you can do a virtual tour of the collection of these same kind of works. And I was just like, this is amazing that this has been happening. And I think it also like, it makes me sad to think that those are some of the same positions that are probably going to get cut first.
Right.
You know, like the people who have made so that you have this virtual collection, this digital content, right? I think I forgot what the question was exactly.
Okay. I think it was more, yeah, it doesn't matter. Well, wow, that's amazing. Let's see. I think I've actually asked all the questions. I had one sort of last question that was maybe a little silly, but if you weren't making art, what would your sort of second calling be in life?
I think I figured out that no matter what, I would have ended up in academia making no money. So I would have fit in it.
Because you don't care about money? I mean, why do you say
No,
that?
it's not because I don't care about money, because the things that I'm interested in don't make any money. So most likely it would have been, I would be teaching English. I would be teaching like literature, right? Or like some sort of, like I think journalism, like, you know,
yeah,
national public radio kind of things are kind of appealing to me. So yeah, it would be in another creative area that just didn't create any income.
No, I love that. It seems like you have such a drive to bring people, well, you just have such a community way about you. Even, you know, you did the poetry reading at ICOSA, which is not what you called it. What did you call?
The open read.
The open read.
Yeah, open read collective listening. Yeah.
So I don't know. I love how a lot of what you do, teaching and the show you did at ICOSA and the open read, it seems to always encourage people to try things, to come together and learn and to create and express. And you're very good at bringing that out of people. And so I love that about your work and you.
Oh, thanks. I mean, that's definitely been new, because I do feel like that when I moved here, I felt like, you know what, I want to, like, I think this was kind of the first move where I was like, I think I'm going to stay here. You know what I mean? I wasn't kind of like looking to move somewhere else. You know what I mean?
That's strange. I swear I've lived other places too, and I have never lived anywhere where more people say that specifically about Austin. I think I'm just going to stay here, and it always makes me feel like I've made the right decision too.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like also just making that commitment of saying like, this is going to be the place. If you want to teach, you know, if you want to be a professor, it's always that you know the possibilities that you're gonna have to move, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of always in the back of your head. Even, you know, when I lived in Seattle, I think when I decided like, oh, I think I want to move from advising or administrative position into, I think I want to teach. And I was like, oh, well, I got to move. Like, that's what's going to happen, right? And so therefore, I don't know if I was as engaged I know I wasn't. I wasn't as engaged like politically or like culturally, well, maybe culturally, but not politically, or even thinking about like community engagement in that way, because it didn't feel like a place that was going to be permanent. When I got here and like the first year went well, and I was like, oh, because I was very unsure, but I was like, oh no, like this feels comfortable. And like, what happens if you say like you're staying here and you put down roots? Yeah. What does that look like? And having the, having these collaborations like Black Mountain Project, being at St. Edward's, where it's got a very specific community and kind of like social justice is in the mission. Mm-hmm. And then also ICOSA, where I have access to spaces, because I couldn't do the open read collective listen without a space. Right. And so, you know, the fact that we could like collaborate and make that happen. And also it's an experiment for me. It's it's a different way for me to think about like work. Yeah, yeah.
ICOSA, you mean specifically, or ICOSA specifically allowed you to think about work differently?
I mean, just like the way that doing these kind of programming that is not me physically making work, like that's a different kind of work. And it's fulfilling. It's interesting because it fulfills some of the things that I get from teaching, or sometimes when I feel like I want to get more of a certain thing out of teaching and it's not happening at that particular moment, like it's fulfilling that. But then it's also fulfilling like physically making work, which I didn't think it could, something else could do. It does that as well. So it like meets in the middle of those kind of two intersections of like teaching and then studio work. So.
Well, so real quick, I know there are people that want to ask a lot of questions. I want to say one last thing, just because you're talking about Austin as an art community. What do you think Austin is lacking? What could we work on more?
Money. I mean, I think that there needs to be, we need more collectors. I think that like there are like people who are like amazing at collecting artwork there, but we need more of that kind of entry, like those entry collectors, right? Because we know that there are a lot of people here who have disposable income, but where it goes as far as supporting cultural things, I'm like not sure, right? So like I had a show at like a Costa for my show. I did The Pleasure of Making. And Alyssa and Joel were the people who like helped fund that show. So like, which they had done like a year and a half before. So there are people out there, but I think that sometimes there's like people standing on the sidelines, kind of like looking, but not necessarily realizing that we need there's like
maybe we make it look too easy.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like they're doing it, it must be fine, right? It's like, no, like people are doing it and they're finding ways to do it. They're like constantly scrabbling for like the same small amounts of money, right? And I also think too, it's just like there is a tendency, and I mean, I think I have to fight against it too, is there's this tendency to ask creative people to do things for free all the time. Like, so you're always like volunteering your time, and then it makes it seem like it's not valuable, like the labor isn't valuable, and it is. It's just that, so I'm thinking about that idea of like, well, if you're asking, what are you also contributing? So it has to be like has to go both ways. So
that's great. Well, let's move over to questions. I know we have a lot of people that want to ask you things. Hi, Jordan.
Hey, Jordan.
And that was such a great conversation, guys. Thank you so much. We've had a couple questions come in already from Andy Campbell and Abby Malik. Andy, I'm going to allow you to talk, so if you want to ask that question yourself, you can go for it.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, how's it going?
I was just thinking about you the other day, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, it was just so edifying to hear you both talk, and especially this last part about kind of Austin's art infrastructure. It seems like something that is always kind of on our minds. But I have a different question for you, Tammy, which, I didn't know that you would possibly be an English teacher if you didn't do art. So I'm actually kind of wondering, without access to a studio, have you turned to literature? And if so, what are you reading? And maybe that's an opening onto a broader question about like, how does literature impact your process or your practice?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it definitely does. And not just literature, but also I can have a tendency to sometimes be listening to like a music that is very kind of like epic storytelling, you know what I mean? So like, if you're thinking about like Kendrick Lamar or something like that, where it's like they are taking you to a place into a specific experience, right? And so thinking about like how that you can fall into a story, how you can fall into, and I read more, like nonfiction things happen usually because it's more about like, as an academic, but my love is fiction. And so, but right now I'm having a really hard time engaging in long format things. And so like kind of like lighter novels are what I'm reading. So I just finished, I did Little Fires Everywhere. I need something shorter and lighter right now. I felt like I'm having a hard time like focusing on really in-depth things. Not that novel's not in-depth, but Do you know what I mean? Just like I need shorter kind of amounts of writing. And poetry is always like a place also that like, you know, because it kind of fulfills these like small moments. And in some ways they're, you know, the minimalism of that kind of writing is very engaging to me. Because I do sometimes feel like my practice is something like I need a bunch of stuff. And I so admire like writers where it's like the pencil and the page, like that's all you really need. And, or, you know, just your computer, but then there's so much space there of trying to fill that I very much admire. The process of thinking of the process of writing and how people approach writing. And thinking about our world, but then making something new. And then having this like comment on it. So, you know, thinking about like, for instance, I don't know, like The Handmaid's Tale, like I remember when I read that novel, like in high school, it seems like science fiction. It seems so crazy to me. And then I probably read it every 4 or 5 years. And every time I'm like, oh no, this is, yeah, taking women's rights away. Oh yeah, this, you know, like extreme, like religious right. Like, oh yeah, like it seems things become more relevant depending on where you're standing in your life and the experiences that you've had. And I think all of that becomes relevant. And I do wonder if that people who experience, I do wonder about people who experience more empathy and compassion, if there is something tied to being a reader, like a vast reader, like, you know, learning about or having kind of sympathetic or empathetic experiences in a work about people who do not look like you, who are not from where you're from, who, you know, maybe don't even really exist, right? Like having that experience, I wonder if that does translate into real life of how you think about when you experience people who are not like you. I don't know if I answered your question at all, Andy, but.
You did. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you and your family are staying healthy.
Oh,
Thanks so much.
All right, Abby, I'm going to allow you to talk if you want to ask your question.
I think she's muted at the moment.
Oh, she's
Hi, I think I unmuted myself now. So hi, Tammy. I appreciated hearing about your process and how you think about the works that you create. So I wanted to ask you about kind of your process of getting ideas for shows that you've curated and your recent poetry event that you curated. Kind of how you think about those, get ideas for those, and then what ideas you have for events, for shows you would want to curate in the future.
Oh yeah, and Abby was in The Pleasure of Making, and like her work is amazing. If you guys haven't, what's your Instagram or what's your website?
My Instagram is Abby Wonderbread, ABI Wonderbread.
Yes. So it's usually just things, you know, I like all of my work is usually really referential to what's happening with me or what I'm seeing at the time. So The Pleasure of Making show, for instance, was, you know, very much of me. I don't know, like I felt like I was at this moment where I was having, having like, you know, a lot of conversations about the making of work and, you know, if you're in any field, you know so much about that field that you can become a little bit jaded about it. So I can kind of compare it to like, I've heard comedians on podcasts say that like other comedians don't laugh when they're at shows of comedians because like to them it's work. And so they'll say that's funny, but not laugh out loud necessarily, right? Because it's just kind of something that happens. And so there's sometimes when as like an artist, like you're looking at so much work, you're having conversations about work and other people's work, and then you're teaching and you're having conversations about students' work or why they aren't making. I think the conversation about like why people aren't making, I was like, well, like who are these people who have lives where they have jobs? They are not professional artists. They are not jaded about like the idea about like all the tensions in the art world, but they just make because they want to make. And that's what that show was really about. Like, I want to see people who are making because they love to make, and let's see what they're making. And let's see what this other community is, these other communities that maybe I don't interact with all the time and that maybe don't even come into ICOSA. So it's also kind of like broadening like the interactions that could happen, so that there were some people who may have been to ICOSA before but may have not. And it also exposed people who came into the gallery to these other people who are making in all kinds of different ways. So beading and cross-stitching and crocheting and woodworking, and just seeing that these kind of, I love that opening, because I was wondering like who's going to be at this opening. I mean, all the artists that are the makers that are going to come and their families, but I also hope that like some of the people who usually come to our shows are coming, so like there could be this cross conversation. And so usually it's just like me being like, I want to see this happen. What is it going to look like? I hope it works. Yeah. And so, and yeah, same thing with Open Read. It's like, what if we did this? Would anyone come? Would anyone do it? Like, how do you set it up? And I think I like the planning and the setting it up. And then I like that moment where you're like, oh, this could be a huge disaster. Yeah. Or this can go great. But either way, that's an experience, whether it's a disaster or if it goes great. And so, yeah, so it's really usually trying to fulfill selfishly something that I feel like I need at the moment. And then seeing like, well, I bet you someone else might feel the same way. And let's see if we can set up an experience that is interesting. Did that answer, Abby? I think she muted.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Abby.
Well, we are right at noon, and those are the only questions we had, actually, so that worked out perfect timing-wise. I just want to thank you both again for being a part of this, and everyone who attended. I want to invite you to continue to join us for coffee chats. They're happening every Thursday at 11 a.m., and you can find those events on our Facebook. Thanks again.
There was one more.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Tammy has something to say. So don't leave yet.
Oh, yeah. Just give me like 30 seconds.
Yeah. Give me a second to pull that back up. I have multiple PowerPoints going.
Tammy, thank you so much for being my first interview ever.
Oh, thank you so much for doing it.
You made it very easy and lovely.
You're a natural, Jana.
Yeah, you are, Jana.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to inform you, if you haven't seen this call, I'm on the AIPP panel, Art in Public Places, and there is a call that is coming up. It's on June 25th, and it's for a permanent exterior work for this neighborhood park. It's a new neighborhood park. They're revamping it, and it's a very diverse neighborhood, and we're really looking for people who, artists that would want to apply. And if you speak another language, that would be really, we encourage you to apply as well. So for this kind of diverse neighborhood. And so it's a $34,000 budget, and always to like maybe look up AIPP's ongoing calls, or just to go to www.publicartist.org to see more information about the calls and the requirements. So yeah, so thanks for letting me shout that out, because that call is coming up soon.
Cool. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. It's great.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Big Medium. Thanks, Jana. Shay.
Our pleasure.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for coming in.